Top Bed Talk.
We have Dr. Jeff Vender. Professor Vender is the Emeritus Harris Family Foundation Chairman of the Department of Anesthesiology at NorthShore University Health System in Evanston, Illinois, which is close to Chicago, basically. And he's also a professor at the University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine. He served on numerous board of directors in the healthcare system and beyond, and he is going to share his views on leading in time of change. Jeff, I think we should just dive right in because you mentioned this before we started, and I think it's at the heart of what you are talking about, but you said there is a dearth in leadership. And, you know, there may be some CEOs in this particular audience that might disagree with you tonight, but you know, we have corporate structure for everything, so it's not working then.
Yeah, let's back up to what you just said, Desiree. We always have leaders who would never agree with what I just said. Dunning and Kruger years ago did studies on people's self-awareness, and what they demonstrated is the more unskilled you were, the less aware you were. When it comes to personal assessment of ourselves, everybody suffers from positive self-illusion. The irony about everybody who leads, in my mind, myself, anybody who leads, you can't judge leadership until long after you're gone. You could be leading in times of good, or you could be leading. I mean, a perfect example, Monty sitting in London, Winston Churchill, by any measure, will go down in history right now as one of the top 10 leaders from before Christ to today. But he was voted out of office when the situation changed. He was no longer the right leader. You can only judge success long after they're gone. The situation might have been, if you invested in the stock market in 2000 to 2008, you were a good investor. What did they do after that? General Motors is General Electric's basically gone today, and Jack Welch was a hero. But he didn't invest in all their core companies, put it all in GE Capital. Financial systems changed. So when you look at him when they were doing well, he was everybody talked about fire the bottom 10%, neutron jack. History will dictate where he turned out. So I never look at any one of us to judge how good we are. We're not the judge of how good we are. History is, the people who work with us are, successes and failures might be.
Yeah. You touched on self-awareness, and I think you also touched about it in your presentation about emotional intelligence and the fact that we have to have that emotional quotient. How do you get somebody to understand that who's already in a leadership position?
Wow. Now you're into teaching.
Can you teach it?
Exactly. Well, I think there's no question you can teach it.
Okay.
The receptiveness, in other words, they've grown plants in the desert. You can do a lot of things that people think you can't do. Obviously, you'd like wonderful soil, wonderful seed to get the best person. But when you say, can you teach it? I think you can make anybody from their baseline better. You just have to begin to identify the people who have as like I said, and I don't want to be insulting, but you don't see a lot of people who are 5'2" playing in the NBA, professional basketball. You could send them to a basketball camp and they'll all play better. They'll understand the game better. Their technical skills are, but they're not going to play in that game. But they get better. So I believe, to answer your question, by people recognizing what EQ is. What is it? Emotional intelligence, emotional quotient. Both have been used interchangeably. You can get people to begin to listen. You can get people to develop relationships. You can get people to become self-aware, so through self-examination, so they can self-regulate a little bit. Maybe not as good as the best, but the best leaders are typically the ones who are best at that. Because to lead, you have to have followers.
Exactly. So can I, if I may, Desiree, Jeff, were you a natural leader from childhood?
Well, first of all, there's the presumption I'm a leader. I've had titles and jobs, as I talk about. I'd like to think, Monty, and I'm going to answer you in a diffuse way.
Yeah.
When I give these meetings, when I talk real talk on leadership and change, my first disclosure slide has 20 different acronyms up there, like CNO, Director of Quality, all these different people. And I always tell the audience, you get these people from elsewhere. A lot of our organizational leaders are hated in their own hospitals, in their own department. I said, here are the phone numbers, call. Find out if this is the person who's talking. Is this how they behave? So to answer your question, I would say no. I think anything good about my leadership, if there is anything good, so I don't want to be presumptive that I'm a good leader. It was through observation of people above me as I was growing who failed. I mean, one of my things that left me early on is I noticed a lot of the very successful people I trained under, worked with, etc., many were divorced. And I made a decision in my life. I wasn't going to give up my family or my wife for success in my career. But I observed that in others and tried to figure out, okay, how can I push this to the limit of success for me? I won't get all the accolades you want. You might not be an academic chairman of the biggest place. You might not, but I gave some things up for those things. So I think a lot of what I've done is through observing others. And I mentioned that in the talk. Observation of what is good. You walk in a home, you might not like modern furniture, but you'll know it was well done when you see it. So when you observe how other people do things, you see the good in it and the bad in it, and you hope that some of the bad you see and you recognize in yourself. And I'll let you change questions in a second. I tell people to this day, I was never the quality listener that a great leader is. And I've worked with some. And you see them just taking it all in. And when they walk out, they have the answer in their mind. You gave it to them maybe. But if you're not a great listener, a lot goes by. And I would say that was a major deficiency for me. But I'm old enough that I don't care anymore. Too late.
It's a hard pill to swallow. I mean, and you gotta realize, that self-realization of that.
It's a reality.
Well, one of the things, kind of you saying, well, I don't know if I'm a leader. One of the points that I want to make sure that we bring out from your presentation was when you said, leadership doesn't come with a title. It doesn't have to come with a title. It can come from anyone. And I tell you through I try to be a leader myself, but that's one thing that I'm trying to impress upon, students and, CRNAs and anesthesiologists in private practice who say, well, I'm not doing, or academics or wherever they're from. It's like, you don't have to be, director of this group to be a leader. You don't have to be traveling and speaking and doing all these different engagements. You can be an active participant in what you are doing to improve quality or whatever it is. And that's leadership in itself.
There's no question. I think some of the greatest innovations we've ever seen were not from visible superstars. There were people who said, I go back to the beginning of arthroscopic surgery. I think about it back in the 70s. And that didn't come from a major academic institution. That came from a single orthopedic surgeon in a community hospital who worked with somebody and said, there could be another way we can do this. And he wasn't challenged by perceptions of, what do you talk? We all know when we started doing laparoscopic gallbladders, all the big surgeons, they're going to do open. And it took years for younger people to come in, and then they had to do it. It's usually the people you don't expect something from that see the opportunity. So much of what we do or have to do is through observation of what is wrong. And then the willingness, as I say, about real change leaders, they tie three things together. They understand marketplace realities. They are part of the workforce, and they understand management's expectations. They bring those three things in a triangle together, and they see something happening, and they say, why aren't we doing this? But it's the willingness to speak up, to challenge power bases and norms, as I said, a commitment to a better way by questioning. But most institutions, most people are afraid if they don't have that position or that role to speak up. But they're the ones who make a difference. Person sitting at the top, he's isolated. I can go on and on of observations I've made where people at the top just have no knowledge of what's going on at the bottom within their institutions.
I was just reflecting on the fact that COVID-19 gave an opportunity for our natural leaders to have an unfettered opportunity to really get on with the job, the challenge we had in front of us, and most of the titles disappeared, and let the natural leaders on the shop floor get on and do a great job. Amazing, fantastic.
Monty, the things I saw in the hospital by certain nurses, certain nurse anesthetist. We had a big role, obviously, in the ICUs, anesthesia providers. And the things you saw people do and think about and suggest, they didn't wait because their health, the health of everybody was at risk. And everybody was being compromised by the same terrible situation of death around them and this feeling I can't do anything. What is this type of thing? Which forced people to be actively engaged but exhausted. And I think in some institutions, I can be very critical of ours, but I can tell you, they didn't waste a penny when it came to PPE stuff or anything. We were never short. Where the University of Michigan, which is a top 10 institution in the country, one of our ex-nurses went up there and they couldn't get N95 masks. They couldn't get this. They're going in rooms. And I'm thinking, this is a preeminent institution. I'm not being critical of them. Maybe they just couldn't get it. But somehow we spent whatever it took to protect. And people like me over my age, anybody over 65, they told you couldn't come to work until I went back in June because they needed more help and I was willing to. But up until that point, they said, we don't want you. We don't need you. Stay home. And they did everything they can to try to do the right thing, which is very rare because I'm usually critical of our administration.
Monty, Jeff, let me pose a question in lieu of the COVID example. It's provocative. Do leaders make the times, or do the times make the leader, or both?
I think when it comes to innovation and transformation, leaders make the time. When it comes to everything else, the situation brings out the leaders. Leadership.
I agree.
True leaders are like eagles. I mean, they see it and they want it to happen, and then they engage everyone around them. They sell it, which I hope we get into talking about how do you sell it. But most of the time, it's how you handle the crises. So it's a situational thing. Eisenhower would have never been president of the United States if it wasn't for Normandy. He was an average student at West Point, but was a logistics expert. And he did the invasion at Normandy, and it was a phenomenal coup. And that gave him his opportunity. If it wasn't for that, he would have just been another general or something and moved on through the process. So I think, success begets success, but crises bring out really unusual things. And, in an operating room, you know who the great surgeons are when the situations are the worst and how they handle it, how high their voices go versus how well they control themselves. That's when you distinguish it. The guy who just falls apart, he's not going to make it. And he can do everything when it's normal, but he's not the guy you're going to go to in a crisis. And you watch the BP disaster, the oil spill. I think his name was Hayward, the UK guy, who made the mistake saying to the world, I want to get my life back. He was done. Versus Jamie Dimon, when they lost $6 billion at JP Morgan, who came out and says, I'm responsible. He didn't go and blame who it was in their organization that screwed this up. I'm responsible to our shareholders, our this, our that. It's me. And that's a whole and we're going to fix it. That's a different messaging in a crisis. Crisis management, my big thing about most leaders is they forget about their people. They think it's about them. They think they're really important.
In a crisis situation, the natural leaders emerge, and the natural leaders often don't have the titles, if you see what I mean. The people with the titles who are great leaders recognize the natural leaders around and amongst them and enable them. But they do a lot of, as Jeff was saying earlier, they do a lot of listening and a lot of enabling, and they are very, very much about, it's not about me, it's about it's about everybody else, if you see what I mean. Yeah. I'm here to give them opportunity to be great, and if I give them opportunity to be great, we'll all be great. So,
yeah,
perfect, because that's servant leadership. Leader, we're all followers, as I said earlier, to somebody else. Typically, you're not the final person. So we all have to be a follower to someone. I wouldn't say I'm the best of followers, but leaders are responsible to the people behind them. And the minute you forget that, if nobody's behind, you turn around and there's no one there. It's a lonely place. You're not really leading. You're in charge. You have the title. You have this. You need people. If you want something to change, those people have to go with you. They have to go with you. And they have to understand the purpose and the why, that emotional connection.
How do we start making these changes? How do we start building these up? And I mean, I know we've touched on little bits and pieces, but really drive that message home for us.
And how to sell it. You promised to tell us how to sell it.
Yeah, how to sell it. Yep.
I want to know how to sell it.
I think there are two theories behind this. One was a book called Switch by Heath and Heath. And I like thinking about the simple things in life, like losing weight, quitting smoking. They basically said there's three elements. There's the rational mind, the why you have to lose weight, why being heavy is bad for you, why quit smoking is bad for you. That's right, and our brains understand it. Then there's the structure, the path to change. So that could be smaller plates, smaller portions, things of diets, various kinds of diets. But the reason all these efforts typically fail, and they typically do, is the emotional connection to get you to sustain it. And that emotional connection is the buy-in and the why you're doing this. I'm doing this so I can see my grandchildren. Well, now flip this back to Simon Sinek, who wrote the book Start With Why. If you can't sell the purpose or the why, which goes right to the amygdala of the brain, the why is the emotional connection. The how is the processes, the what is the result. All right? If you can't sell that why, don't try to go there, because you'll get a momentary buy-in, you'll get compliance to a degree, but you won't get sustainability because it won't be part of the culture. To be part of the culture, it's the why. This is why we do what we do. This is why I'll wash my hands. This is why I'll wear PPE appropriately. This is why I won't deviate from appropriate behavior, and I will check the nerve block stimulator. I will do this despite I don't think it's necessary. It's a behavioral thing, but it all circles around emotional connection and your engagement with that emotion.
Amen, Jeff Vender. I love everything that you just said. That's it. I love it. But hopefully we will see you at EBPOM London. Monty.
We do have one Slido comment we must share here.
Yes. Thank you.
Someone out there. I cannot agree more, lots of exclamation marks. Thank you, lots of exclamation marks, for being so honest on lack of leadership from admin. So, just someone took the trouble to write it in.
Yeah.
Cheers to you, Jeff Vender. Thank you so much
for Sunday morning, and thank you for the opportunity.
Top Med Talk. Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, evidence-based perioperative medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.